I'm Laura Bonnell, and this is the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast coming to you from Detroit. Please subscribe and even rate and comment on our podcasts when it moves you. I learn something new with every podcast, and I'm always inspired by the people that are showcased here. We don't give medical advice. You need to connect with your doctor for that. I hope that this Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast educates you and sparks some volunteering or advocacy. The CF community needs people like you. Thanks to our sponsors, Viatris and Vertex, for their support. Diane Shader Smith's daughter, Mallory, died from complications of cystic fibrosis 6 years ago. She was 25 years old. Diane published her daughter's diary, Salt in My Soul. I'm sure many of you have read that. She's now released a second book called Diary of a Dying Girl. The title honestly may not make you want to read it because it sounds depressing, but as Diane explains, it is a wake-up call about our public health crisis, and it's actually an empowering story. You'll be inspired by it and so impressed with her beautiful writing. Welcome, Diane. Always great to talk to you. Thanks for keeping this alive about not only your daughter Mallory's life, but also about the AMR that we're going to start talking about right now. So thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
And this is the second podcast I think we've done together.
Yep.
But you have done so much. Mallory battled a bacteria called Bisapacia, a superbug that's drug resistant and antimicrobial resistance. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But you have done more than anyone I know in this world, as far as I'm concerned, about putting a face to AMR, from the White House to NATO. That doesn't even touch everything that you've done. So I can't thank you enough on behalf of the entire CF community. You are doing so much. Do you ever feel overwhelmed, or how are you feeling as you continue on this really important life-saving journey?
Well, I first and foremost feel sad that Mallory's not here to know that her life has inspired all the advocacy and all the work that's been done. But I feel very connected to so many in the CF community, and I know how difficult the struggles are for people. So it is passion and mission-driven work. So I don't get overwhelmed and I don't get tired.
That is good. And like I said, you're helping all of us understand this. You came and you spoke to our education day. Gosh, time flies, but I think it was last year, and made parents aware who didn't know anything about this. How is this second book, Diary of a Dying Girl, how is this helping to raise awareness?
In two ways. The first is that I added entries about Mallory's mental health, which is a topic that I didn't really think about in the beginning when I worked on entries and I pulled from the diary for Salt in My Soul. But I started in my talks to pull quotes from Mallory's diaries and journal that I did use when I spoke about her, about AMR, about phage therapy, about cystic fibrosis, about organ donation and lung transplantation, all the things that Mallory writes about and stood for. And I realized that how she was feeling about it all, the psychological toll that the disease took, should be included and I should share. I think in the beginning, I just wanted to protect and preserve her image, but we're using it for mental health. And then the other really important way we're using it is that I decided to use the launch of Diary of a Dying Girl to do something much bigger than just retell Mallory's story. And so I asked the World Health Organization, the CDC, and many other groups, including Partnership to Fight Infectious Disease and Biotech Innovation Organization, the AMR Action Fund, CARB-X, all these different groups working on AMR. I asked them if they would work with me on a global AMR diary. And so we launched that the same day that Diary of a Dying Girl came out, because the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. So having this global project launch on the same day that Mallory's memoir was coming out really helped raise awareness. We got an LA Times story, a piece in Forbes, MedPage Today, and it has continued to raise awareness for both AMR and the physical and mental health effects of cystic fibrosis and antimicrobial resistance and all the other parts of Mallory's story that everyone can relate to.
You know, I said in the introduction, the title of the book might be a little depressing if someone's thinking, oh, do I want to read this book? But it is so uplifting. And even in the beginning, when she is talking about giving her real thoughts for you to read later, because I don't know if she said it's hard to say it when you're alive or say it out loud. But I mean, gosh, thank God she did what she did and wrote all these things down, because she gave all of us so much insight, and I'm sure in some ways some sort of peace of mind for you. I mean, nothing can help you when you lose a child, but do you feel that way at all?
Yes, definitely. First of all, it gave me a way to channel my grief, and it does feel good to help people. And I get emails and texts and LinkedIn messages and Facebook notes from all over the world from people who tell me that Mallory's story and writings have helped them through their own personal struggles and how they stayed up all night reading it and they read it in 2 days. I mean, I get unbelievable testimonials from people, which does propel me forward.
That is wonderful. And it allowed all of us to get to know her through her own words and through you. You are getting a lot of visibility. Are you seeing that things are changing and that there is more research since you started this?
Oh, yeah. When we first got phage therapy for Mallory as a possible treatment for resistant bacteria, which is ultimately what killed her, there was no formal center doing phage therapy. And now there are 5 formal centers in the U.S., and there's legislation on Capitol Hill trying to get funding for it. And there is this global awareness that it's the resistant bacteria that's not only killing CF patients, but cancer patients and regular people that go in for hip replacements. And when you have more people dealing with an issue and more eyeballs are on it, you're more likely to get some treatment for it. And at the end of the day, the disease cystic fibrosis is really, for most people, a lifelong battle with a resistant bacteria. And many of the deaths, like Mallory's, that say she died from CF, she really died from a resistant bacteria, in her case, Cepacia. But, CF patients have Pseudomonas, and they have MRSA, and they have staph, they have all kinds of infections, and they are definitely disproportionately affected. But no one is safe. And the fact that I have had the opportunity to elevate the work I'm doing using Mallory's story to help the AMR landscape has been very gratifying, because so many people are dying from or will die from resistant bacteria. The World Health Organization actually calls it one of the top global health threats facing humanity, but we've always thought of everything in terms of disease specifics, like she died from cancer, they died from HIV, he died from CF. But in fact, many of these deaths are really from resistant bacteria. That's ultimately what kills most CF patients.
Huge and really important point. And I'm so glad, obviously, you're mentioning that all over the world. I also wanted you to talk about, I know when we met in person, you were talking to the CF community here in Michigan about the fact that there are so many different words for drug resistance. Have you moved forward in calling it one thing, or getting people to not just say superbug or AMR? How is that kind of changed or morphed or stayed the same?
Well, first of all, so that people listening really understand, it's what I call the alphabet soup of acronyms that leads to confusion about this issue. The World Health Organization uses AMR for antimicrobial resistance. The CDC has been using AR for antibiotic resistance. The doctors have been using DRI for drug-resistant infections, but they talk about DR drug resistance. And if you go look up any studies in the medical journals, they use MDR for multiply drug resistance. So that creates confusion, and people don't understand it's the same problem. You also hear a lot of talk about sepsis. She died from sepsis. He had a septic shock situation. And that is actually the manifestation of what happens when the bacteria gets into the bloodstream. it's all the same problem. And what the World Health is saying is that by 2050, 10 million people per year will die from AMR. CF is already losing the vast majority of its patients to resistant bacteria. I mean, some die from other things, but that's what the most people, I mean, Travis Flores just passed away, and it's heartbreaking. And we've lost so many of the people that we knew, Mallory and I, and Trikafta has definitely been a game changer, and people are living longer, but they're still getting infections that still need to be treated. So the CF community is one of the major stakeholders in this AMR crisis.
Can you tell people briefly what phage therapy is?
I'm not a scientist or a doctor, and so my description of phage therapy is very basic. It's a layperson's understanding, which I think is going to be important anyway. So phages are found in the soil, and they're viruses that attack bacteria. They are less likely to become resistant, which is why they're a good option to consider.
You also, I think, mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you saw in the autopsy that phage was beginning to help Mallory. So you did know that if given more time, it may have saved her?
Yes. The autopsy showed proof of concept that the phages had reached their targets and they were starting to work. She didn't get them in time. And I'm very distraught that there was an option that could have saved her that we were not allowed to try sooner. So one of the reasons I advocate so heavily for phage therapy is because there are anecdotal cases of people who have been saved by phage therapy. And unfortunately, our healthcare system, and I understand why, they don't want people to die from premature use of medications that can kill. But I do wish we had a faster way to bring drugs to market. But it's hard to test. It's hard to do clinical trials. They cost millions and millions of dollars. And it takes a while to make sure that something that initially seems to be efficacious doesn't end up to be problematic. So there are reasons why the FDA moves slowly, but it's frustrating because I think Mallory could have been saved, and there are people who have been saved. There's a retired principal in San Diego, who had an E. coli infection that the doctors kept treating with antibiotics over and over. He asked for phage because he'd studied it. He wasn't able to get it. He went to the Republic of Georgia and he was cured.
Wow.
And he is now a phage therapy advocate. He didn't have cystic fibrosis, but it doesn't matter. We need people like that. And Ella Balasa was very, low lung function when I met her. She got her phages in 2019, and she's out there advocating all the time for phage therapy as a patient advocate. And she's got 6 extra years. She's been living 6 years longer than Mallory because she got phage therapy when she needed it. So it's very depressing to me that Mallory wasn't able to get it sooner, but it also fuels my drive to get it for other people because I know the suffering that exists and I want to save others from having to go through it.
And no one's working harder on it than you. And I will say, you mentioned Travis Flores, and you may not have known Steve Strickland. He also just, passed from complications of CF here in Michigan. And then Matt McCloskey, with Take a Breather, he also died. And I think phage would have helped all three of them. So there's so much hope. I mean, I know it's hard to say, but do you think this is 10 years down the road that we're going to see that it's going to really start to help people? Is it less? Is it more? Do you have any sort of time frame about when everybody, insurance companies and everybody, can get on board?
Well, this year they're having the United Nations General Assembly, which is the UNGA meeting in September. And a lot of groups are working to raise awareness for AMR, and that will drive funding and policy changes. So I'm optimistic that in the next few years, things will get better, but I don't have a magic wand or a crystal ball, so I don't know for sure.
What can we all do to help you propel this? Is it writing, talking, everything? What can people do to support you?
Well, the first thing I would like them to do is read Diary of a Dying Girl so they understand what it's like to live with a resistant bacteria. And then they can learn sort of the steps that people should be following. For example, don't buy meat or chicken that has been infused with antibiotics because the animal husbandry industry creates resistance and leads to more problems by using antibiotics in our meat and our cattle and our chicken. That's one thing. You can be more careful with hand washing protocols so we don't spread the bacteria, so people don't get it as often. You can follow the directions when the doctor does give you an antibiotic to finish your course, because taking a shorter course also leads to resistance. And then there are bigger world issues. For example, war. The reason I spoke to NATO is because war and conflict areas drive resistance. There's a breakdown of public health infrastructure, and a soldier will get injured on the battlefield, and that's a ripe, fertile breeding ground for bacteria to evolve and grow. And what happens is the bacteria outsmarts the antibiotics. And so we need to keep coming up with new treatments. But antibiotics by design become resistant. And also a lot of the drug companies have left the field. They're not making drugs anymore because there isn't a lot of ROI, return on investment. And who wants to make a drug that you can only use for a limited amount of time when you could be making a drug like Lipitor or Viagra or Prozac or Ozempic that you take every day for the rest of your life, and there's a built-in financial reward structure. That's why many people are working on the Pasteur Act. Mm-hmm. And the point is to get Congress to subsidize the making of drugs through a subscription model or different ways so that companies will be incentivized to make drugs so that we have better options. And also supporting phage therapy research, which is important. Becoming aware is really ultimately educating yourself is the most important thing we can do.
So important. I know you understand this too, but most people don't know all of this. Most people are just trying to survive in their lives. So it's really important we get this out to everyone. I know you're doing it 24/7, but it is kind of scary that there's so much that people should know and be able to tell everyone, and so much going on in legislation that maybe people don't know about. So,
but you make a really good point, and I know this from when Mallory was alive, which is when you are just fighting the disease and trying to stay alive, it's hard to get involved in advocacy or fundraising and the different things that we need to be doing. But the CF community, everyone has loved ones, and the loved ones can do some of the work if the patients themselves can't because they're too busy fighting to stay alive. I just talked to somebody who told me her friend who's 52 with CF. I said, wow, 52, that's amazing. And she said he spends 9 hours a day on treatment just to stay alive. So we can't expect CF patients to be the ones out there advocating. But what I really would encourage people to do is to go to the Global AMR Diary and log on and share their story. Because what we're trying to do is make the case that there are so many people out there who need more drugs, who need phage therapy, so that we can incentivize companies and legislators to pass bills that will make funding available.
And you will give me that link, and we will put it in the show notes as well. And also, we can put the link in so people can get Mallory's book as well.
Great.
Who do you think are the best researchers right now and the best clinics where, this phage and the AMR research is being done?
Well, I don't want to be passing judgment on where the better clinics are, but I can tell you that at Yale and at UC San Diego, they are two of the pioneering institutions working on phage therapy. But I know Baylor, Texas A&M, and some of the other ones, Harvard is now doing research, Stanford is doing research. So that's something people can do is write to their Congress people. They can, although I hate to say that because have I ever written to my congressperson? I mean, I don't think that's something most people do. But I do say talk to your doctors and ask for phage therapy and ask if it's being supported at their institution, their local universities. I also think a really, really important thing to do is to put pressure on the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation that has a lot of money that they made from drug development and venture philanthropy. They should be spending more money on phage therapy too.
Absolutely. And are you finding out that pediatricians, people that maybe are not in the specialty field, are they aware of this, or do we need to?
Most know. That's the crazy part.
It is crazy.
I cannot tell you how many audiences I speak to where they don't know what AMR is. Everybody's heard of CF, but they don't know what phage therapy is. They don't understand AMR. They don't recognize that it's a link between the two, because a lot of people think, oh, well, they have CF, they're going to get bacteria. That's part of their disease. But the truth is, you can have a community-acquired infection. You can get a hospital-acquired infection when you go in for a root canal or any other number of treatments, plus many of the other disease groups like cancer, HIV. They are at disproportionately high risk of getting a superbug, but no one is safe.
I agree. And I know it's probably hard to pick your either favorite quotes of Mallory's from this, but is there something that stands out where you think, wow, everyone will get this, this will resonate?
Yes. Well, there's two. One is, I'm limited in what I can say, but not in what I can do. And that's really important. And the other thing is, cystic fibrosis does a lot of taking of dreams, of time, of travel, of friendships, of freedom, of potential, of plans, of lives. It's a complex, unpredictable, irreversible, progressive, painful, suffocating, choking weed.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I encourage everyone to read it too. You will be so inspired, and of course you'll be sad reading it also, but I think more than anything, you'll be inspired to make sure there isn't another Mallory, to make sure there isn't another Diane who's lost her child to CF. So yeah, I really encourage everyone.
I have one more quote.
Go ahead.
I read because there are a lot of things I can't do. I read because I want to see things in my head that aren't there, to know about emotions I've never felt before, so that maybe if I do feel them, they'll be recognizable. I read because the vast wholeness of existence, the immeasurable, multifaceted beauty of what it means to be human, cannot be perceived through one life. Books have taught me compassion. They've taught me to see beyond the bubble I was raised in. They've shown me other experiences, other lives, other worlds. They've awakened my spirit of adventure.
Again, beautiful. And it seems like Mallory knew or would have known that her voice would carry on. Do you feel like she knew that when she was leaving all of this for you?
You know, it's an interesting question. I wish that I could say yes and no for sure. After she had her lung transplant, and she'd done a lot of writing and she'd published blogs, and everybody was very responsive. And her Stanford professor who did her senior thesis with her, whose name is Sue McConnell, she said Mallory was one of the best writers she'd seen at Stanford in 20 years teaching. And I told Mallory that. And after she had her lung transplant, I said, you need to tell your story. And she had an agent who wanted to work with her. And she said to me, I don't know what I'd write about. So on one hand, I think she knew she had a lot to say and she left me instructions to publish. But on the other hand, in the day-to-day, I think she doubted whether people would really find her work inspiring. But in her blogs, there were always people commenting on how amazing her writing was. And people always wanted to hear what she had to say. So I don't know. I wish I knew, and I wish she had, but I'm not sure.
Okay, here's what I think. I think all the great artists maybe had no idea that their paintings or drawings or words would live on. So in my mind, she's one of the greats and she didn't realize it, just like the other greats maybe had no idea how their work would live on. So that's how I'm going to believe it, because her writing is just incredible, like you said. What else is happening in the AMR world, and what else are you working on to raise awareness?
I'm working on the Global AMR Diary. I'm giving a lot of talks around Diary of a Dying Girl, and I'm continuing to speak on AMR all over the world.
That is wonderful. I'm glad that it's continuing to grow and change the world. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that we didn't touch on about this journey of trying to get phage therapy going?
I would say be vocal and talk about it. Ask your doctors about it. Tell your friends about it. And pay attention to news articles that talk about resistant bacteria or superbugs. so that you can really wrap your arms around how big this problem is. And maybe if we can put everybody together, which is what we're trying to do with the Global AMR Diary, bring all the voices together, people will really start to feel that this problem is as important and as serious as the World Health Organization tells us it is.
And the book, is it correct? It's just under 400 pages. Is that right?
Well, the paperback is 369, and there's, different from Salt My Soul, there's pictures in the middle, which I was really happy that they wanted to do that.
Nice. I think it will go very fast for most people. And I also wanted everyone to know that all the money goes to AMR research through Mallory's Legacy Fund. If people want to get the book, like I said, we will have the link, but how do they get it?
It's on Amazon. It's on the Random House website. The diaryofadadyinggirl.com website has links to all the different places you can buy it.
Wonderful.
And it's on audio, and it's read by Mara Wilson, who played Matilda in the movie. And Matilda was one of Mallory's all-time favorite movies. So that is very special. And she does a great job. And for a lot of people like me, I'd much rather listen to a book than sit down and read it. So I'm a big Audible fan.
Yeah, that's great to know. Thank you so much for coming on again on the podcast and raising awareness and talking about everything that you're doing, because it's going to impact all of us.
Thank you so much for having me. I think it's really important for the CF community to know that there are people out there advocating on their behalf. And it's not just me. There's a lot of people working on this issue. And I want to tell everybody to have hope and use your voice.
Thank you, Diane.
Okay, take care.
The original music in this podcast is performed by Kevin Allen.
It's not complicated.
Who happens to have cystic fibrosis.
We all got our worries and fears. I know it's got you frustrated, but loving you is so alright.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, visit our website at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's the BONNELL Foundation.org. This podcast was sponsored by Vertex Pharmaceutical, The Science of Possibility, and Viatris. It was produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts. Follow our show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.